Hello, everybody. I'm going to call this meeting of the Public Works Commission into order. And we will start with a calling of the roll. Commissioner Morgan.
I'm here.
Commissioner Collette.
I'm here.
Commissioner Ellis.
Here.
Commissioner Crowley.
Here.
Commissioner Hilton. And I think that gets us to a quorum. Awesome. Thank you so much, everybody. We will go ahead and get started. First on our agenda is the approval of the minutes from our last meeting on July 7th, and I would entertain a motion.
Chair, I motion
Yes.
that we approve the minutes.
There's a motion. Is there a second?
I second.
Motion and a second. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Motion carries. Awesome. I would also like to recognize our city council members, Councilmember Bajan and Councilmember Halliburton, for being with us today. And we will move on to our regular agenda items. And it looks like up first is an update on the Water Renewal Fund bond election. And I will turn it over to staff for the presentation.
Thank you, Chair Gravatt. What I'd like to do for the commission is share a presentation that I gave to City Council back on August 17th. That was the evening of the first reading of the bond ordinance, and more just provide an update to the commission. No action needed. It's just providing the latest on the bond election, bond amounts, timing, and the schedule and everything. So I just wanted to present this information. And then during the legal update from our attorney, Mary Grant, she's going to get into some of the details of the do's and don'ts of bond elections for commissioners. So that'll be part of Mary's presentation. Okay, so on the 17th, I presented information to council just to give them information on what was in the bond ordinance. But before I jumped into that, I spent some time talking about past community investments and frankly didn't do a very good job, in part because the slide didn't pop up. But also I didn't explain that what you see on the left there is a freshwater mussel. That's a very good thing, and I'll explain why here in a second, but let me set that context first. That's a very good thing, that what we're looking at on the screen is suggesting that there's very high quality water in the Boise River. So the community has for decades paid monthly sewer bills. That revenue comes into our department, into the Water Renewal Fund, and we use that to build the facilities, maintain the facilities, operate the facilities that provide the treatment for wastewater. Those past community investments have been paying off, and one of the indications that we have that suggests they are paying off is that freshwater mussel that you see on the left part of the slide. That is specimen number 18. And it's important because about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, we started finding freshwater mussels in the Boise River. And that's a big deal. That's suggesting that the health of the river is good. I was up on the Salmon River a couple of weeks ago, and when you're up there, you can see clusters of freshwater mussels. That's indicative of a high quality river. The importance of specimen number 18 here is that it was found downstream of our water renewal facilities. This little guy was found by the Linda Bridge, which is downstream of both the Lander Street and the West Boise facility, suggesting that the water quality downstream of our facilities are just as good as, are getting better and approaching what we would see upstream of the facilities. So that's really good news. So the investments that we've made at Lander Street, at West Boise, at the phosphorus removal facility at Dixie Drain, those are all leading to improved water quality in the river. So we're proud of that. And so those past community investments are paying off. But as we move forward, future investments are needed. We start off by certainly acknowledging that wastewater treatment is an obligation that we have under the Clean Water Act. About 2015 timeframe, we estimated the replacement value of the water renewal system. We estimated it back then at about $2 billion. Well, based on interest and based on increased construction costs, if we were to try to replace the system today, that's nearly a $3 billion proposition. So we have about $3 billion in existing assets in the system. As we move forward, we need to make investments in the water renewal system, very significant capital investments. We need to build things. So the primary driver moving into the next 20 years is proactive repair and replacement of the existing system. Almost 50% of our upcoming costs are just related to repairing and replacing the treatment facilities and the piping network that's under the city. So, for example, Lander Street was built in 1949, West Boise was built in 76, and then we have almost 1,000 miles of pipe, the oldest being installed in 1898, at least that according to our records. The Lander Street facility, we've already started to replace. We're in phase one. We're at the very beginning of replacing that facility. Phase one should be complete next year. It's on budget, or I'm sorry, on schedule and under budget. So good news story there. And over the next 20 years, we'll be replacing Lander Street in full. And then once that's done, we've got to pivot over to West Boise. That was built in 76, and some of those parts of that plant are aging out as well. And then certainly the 1,000 miles of pipeline under the city, some of that is aging out. The pictures to your left are the Joplin main that goes into West Boise. The top picture is before replacement. You can see those lines hanging down are gaskets. We have some groundwater coming into the pipe. And so that was a priority for replacement. We got that line replaced. So down below is the 2018 kind of after picture of the Joplin main replacement. That's just an example of the types of projects that we need to pursue moving forward. We do a good job of maintaining the system, but there just comes a time where you just need to replace it, not unlike a roof on a house. There's only so many patches you can make before you just got to replace it. There are other funding drivers. We have community expectations. We heard very clearly from the community, they expect us to help address climate issues. And one of the things we can do there is by diversifying our water supply. And so we're going to start pursuing a recycled water program for any new capacity that we add. We do have additional regulatory requirements in the future. We have to meet specific phosphorus needs as well as temperature and other emerging constituents that will be coming. And then that last bullet is related to growth, not just residential growth, but we do have economic development that we want to support in the city. And we want to make sure that we have capacity to support industries, to support commercial businesses that want to come to Boise. So that system capacity piece is important. We need to add about 10 million gallons per day of additional capacity over the next 20 years to meet growth and to be able to promote economic development. And so how do we pay for these improvements that we've developed and predicted and put into our plan, the water renewal utility plan? So one of the approaches that we are considering and moving forward with is bond financing. And so why would we consider bond financing? I have a list of 4 bullets there. It takes advantage of historically low interest rates. The cost of capital right now is very low. The city of Nampa was able to get a DEQ state revolving fund loan at an interest rate of 1.68%. It's extremely low interest rate. Now, whether we could get that same one, not sure, but we're hopeful to get a competitive interest rate. They have been historically low. If we can get approval from the voters for bond financing, it could give us access to new funding sources. So we'd be able to access the DEQ state revolving fund loan program. We'd be able to access the EPA's WIFIA loan program. That's a loan direct from the Treasury, again, at those low interest rates. So we're hopeful that if we can get the yes vote, that we can go seek out new sources of funding that we have not had access to in the past because we didn't have the ability to take on bond financing. Certainly, I'll show you a graphic here in a second. It reduces upfront rate increases. That's an affordability question for us. We're hopeful that if we get the yes vote on the bond, that we'll be able to keep upfront rate increases low. And we think bond financing aligns costs with those benefiting from new infrastructure in the future. We refer to this as intergenerational equity. So that if we paid cash, we would front load the cost burden on current ratepayers. But if we're able to finance those costs over time, we can better align those costs with those benefiting with the new infrastructure in the future. So the total bond amount that we're requesting from permission from the voters to seek is up to $570 million to be financed over 30 years. And that's $570 million to be the debt amount in the next 10 years. So we would, in the next 10 years, seek an amount of 570, and that 570 would be financed over 30 years. And that 570 number came from multiple sources. We have construction cost estimates. We've been talking with contractors in the Valley on cost escalation and what they see coming in the future. And so we try to account for that in that number. And then also the increased inflation that we're seeing here in the near term is also a way that the way that we developed that 570 number. So what we'll be putting on the bond ballot is requesting permission from voters to borrow up to $570 million. And I'll go through in a second here on what a yes vote and a no vote means. This is the proposed ballot language. I won't read that to you in detail. I would just direct you to that last sentence. That's really the crux of the question. Shall the city of Boise City, Idaho be authorized to keep sewer customer rate increases low by issuing and selling one or more series of revenue bonds up to $570 million over the next 10 years? Something I forgot to mention in the previous slide, this is a revenue bond election. So we need a simple majority, 50% plus one voter approval, not a super majority, but a simple majority. So based on that ballot language, what does a yes vote mean and what does a no vote mean? The yes vote authorizes bond funding up to $570 million. It provides access to new funding sources, as I mentioned, the DEQ, SRF as an example, and then results in lower upfront rate increases. A no vote indicates a preference for cash funding. It rejects bond funding, but not the projects. We still have to get these projects done. It results in sharper upfront rate increases. And so specific to the rate increases, the two rows going across, the top row is a yes vote, so it would be cash and bond financing. And then the bottom row is a no vote, a cash only financing. And so the yes vote would be a rate increase in 22 of 9.9%. And you can see the estimates for rate increases in the out years. And then a no vote, cash only, is up to 53% in 22. And then you can see the projected rate increases in the out years based on current cost estimates. Want to emphasize that those rate increases that are in the out years are just projections at this point. And then finally, just a quick look at the timeline, the bond election timeline. We just got the final reading with the ordinance with council yesterday, and that was approved yesterday evening on the 31st. We're working through some deadlines in the election process with Ada County, all working towards election day on November 2nd. And then throughout that, we'll be providing community education. It's a really important piece that Mary will talk about. City staff cannot provide advocacy. We can only educate voters on what a yes vote means and what a no vote means. So Mary will go into that in more detail during the legal update. And with that, I'll stand for questions.
Thank you, Director Burgos. Are there any questions from my fellow commissioners?
Can you highlight what the community education piece will look like?
Chair Gravatt, Commissioner Ellis, sure. So we're standing up things like web pages. We'll have frequently asked questions. We'll be offering to meet with anybody that wants more information on the bond election, making sure that we're sticking to the education piece. Colin, feel free to jump in here. Colin Hickman within Public Works is helping set this up. But there's a lot of components that will be part of the community education piece. Colin?
Yes, Chair Gravatt, Commissioner. So I think the other big one, Steve hit on a number of them, but I think the other big one and perhaps our best way to get directly to eligible voters would be we are planning on 2 direct mail pieces to all eligible voters that would go out in mid to early October, and then another one in late October. And so that would be mailed to every eligible voter within Boise. That explains, just as Steve alluded to, what a yes vote means, what a no vote means, and how they can vote. So that is the most direct route that we are planning on.
Awesome, thank you. And a question that I believe Councilmember Sanchez raised that was illuminating to me in the council's discussion was who will be eligible to vote in this bond election now that the city of Boise has council districts. And if I recall correctly, this will be almost the entire city, regardless of which district you are in, will be eligible to vote, minus a small population in, was it Southwest Boise? That's in another area of impact.
Yeah, Chair Gravatt, I'm going to defer to Mary. She's been working with Ada County to try to determine the electorate for the bond election. Mary?
Chair Gravatt and commissioners, in response to your question and what was presented to City Council is that the districting for City Council elections will have little to no effect on the electorate for this particular bond. All eligible voters in Boise City will be allowed to vote with this small exclusion of West Boise Sewer District residents. And that is because that is its own independent sewer district with its own authority to make assessments, set rates. They also are authorized to hold their own elections if they were to want to issue their own bonds. So the city's authority as it relates to these revenue bonds and its sewer system does not extend to the authority over the West Boise Sewer District. And so that's been the conclusion in working with the county in terms of coming to that sort of resolution regarding our electorate, excuse me.
Awesome. Thank you for that clarification. And I believe that Commissioner Crowley had a hand up. Did you still have a question?
I did, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Question for Steve or Colin. Were you planning on using bill inserts that go out with the utility bills for the educational, as part of the educational effort?
Chair Gravatt, Commissioner Crowley, thank you for the question. We did not, in part because the way our utility billing system works is we work on a kind of a 2-month basis. And unfortunately, we would not have had enough time to put a utility bill insert into the bills, given the compressed time frame. We just got the formal approval on the 31st. And so we didn't want to be presumptuous and assume that that would be the case. So we're not going to pursue that. Instead, as Colin alluded to, we're going to have the mailers go out, I think 2 separate mailers specifically trying to address this issue. Thank you for the question, though. It's a good point.
Thank you, Steve.
All right, thank you. Are there any other questions from the commission? Going once, going twice, and hearing none, I will thank you for this presentation, and we will move on to the next item on our agenda, which is a training on parliamentary procedures, and I will turn it over to staff.
Great. Chair Gravatt, I'm going to turn it over to Mary Grant. This is a follow-up to the first session we had, I think it was last commission meeting on parliamentary procedures. This is the second half of that presentation.
Where we need to be. There we go. Good evening again, Chair Gravatt and commissioners. So as Director Burgos indicated, this is sort of the second part of a legal training, and the focus today really is going to be more on navigating a process of decisions on appeals. And then, as he alluded to, talking a little bit at the end about the bond election and sort of the conduct and role of commissioners. As kind of a setting the stage or framing, these sorts of decisions on appeals that may come before the commission happen on a relatively rare basis. So this training right now really is meant to be a fairly broad overview. We'll go through it quickly, hopefully not taking the full 45 minutes, mostly just to get each commissioner aware of sort of what that process looks like, kind of have some exposure to it before, in the event a case came up or an appeal came before the commission, there would be some background as to how that would be handled on an appeal. So with regards to, last time we talked about what the authority and scope of the Public Works Commission is, that you provide recommendations on various things within their utilities, such as geothermal, irrigation, sewer, et cetera. So there are several places within the Boise City Code where appeals on a staff decision can be appealed and come before the Public Works Commission for review. So that's really where our focus is. And I'm just going to go over a couple of the statutory examples of where an appeal may come before the commission. So for example, on this slide, it reviews a connection requirement or assessment and fees for irrigation, a disconnection of service for irrigation. If they want, a commercial provider wants a waiver with regards to certain sewer fees, if staff decided because of non-payment of a bill or something of that nature or exceeding capacity to disconnect a sewer service, that particular user could come and appeal that decision. Similarly, there are appeals for waivers of solid waste requirements, any suspension of service of solid waste, also with pretreatment and stormwater management. Geothermal are an exception. So where I just give you that whole list of previous things on the prior slide, there are some that go directly from staff decision up to city council. So the one exception to that would be geothermal appeals would go directly to city council and skip over the commission. Generally speaking, a procedure for appeals, and with the caveat, there's nothing specified in any one of these codes that directly speaks to each type of appeal. So what I'm giving you is a broad overview of sort of procedural due process. And maybe I'll step back just for a quick moment and explain the difference between substantive due process and procedural due process, which you'll hear me say a few different times tonight. Substantive is really, does the city have the authority to regulate this? And the procedural due process is how best should they regulate and what kind of protections do they need to give to those residents using these services. So when I talk about procedural due process, that's what we're talking about, is really protecting the process and the opportunity and notice for a person to be heard, or an entity in some cases. So generally speaking, on procedures for appeals, that appeal needs to be in writing. There should be a notice of hearing, which would be the date and time it will be heard before the Public Works Commission. The standard for how do you decide whether this was rightly decided by staff or not is going to be somewhat dependent on the context, right? So the decision of the Public Works Department has to be sort of not reasonable based on the criteria or eligibility within that particular statute. So taking that a little further, if there are specific criteria as to when staff can make a decision to disconnect sewer, we would be looking at that statute particularly, see if the Public Works staff decision kind of has a justifiable or defensible analysis of that criteria, sort of ties the facts and circumstances back to it and made a reasonable or justifiable decision. So that's why I say it's dependent on context. And if one of these appeals were to arise, then we would be providing the Public Works Commission the specific statutory examples and criteria for what basis those decisions can be made on at the staff level. When the kind of decision like that comes before the commission, generally there are three ways that you can go. The commission can affirm that decision, which is supporting whatever Public Works staff did, reversing the decision, saying we think staff maybe was a little erroneous here, and reversing that decision, or modifying it, saying, yeah, we think they maybe got it right, but we're going to modify it slightly for these reasons. And then whatever final decision comes from the Public Works Commission, we would memorialize in writing and have the Public Works Commission approve those findings so that the appellant, whoever it was that came before the commission, has some basis to say, okay, what were the reasons that Public Works Commission affirmed, reversed, or modified this particular appeal? Just as far as some basis on how to come to a decision, what those reason statements kind of look like is really making any kind of public record to support the decision that the commission is making. So always tying back first and foremost to the criteria and standards that are considered relevant for that particular issue. So kind of going along with our example on a disconnection of sewer, tying it back to that statute as to what basis we have as a city to be able to disconnect. You state the relevant or contested facts that the commission is giving weight, which ones apply sort of to which criteria, and explaining some rationale for the decision that you've made based on consideration of that criteria along with the facts that you're applying to it. Generally speaking, when an appeal is going to come before the commission, you'll have some sort of staff report or summary of the proceedings that have happened at the lower level first. And if staff is making a decision, there's generally going to be some basis or rationale they have for supporting it. So that would come in the form of sort of a staff report or the review prior to the commission hearing anything from the appellant and then being able to consider other relevant testimony. So that staff report, if you agree with those, is your reason statement, right? It is the basis for your decision if you feel that Public Works made the right call. So, I move that we deny the appeal for XYZ reasons based on what is put in the staff report. That would be easy enough because those statements are already on the record. If you disagree with the staff report, that's where the commission has a little bit more work to do. And then in its deliberations really needs to start from scratch in terms of tying what facts they find relevant to the individual criteria as a basis for reversing or modifying the decision that the Public Works staff made. I have this in bold that conclusions are not sufficient. So as an example, again, just threading through our hypothetical disconnection from sewer fees, saying we approve the decision by Public Works staff because this particular user failed to meet X criteria in the statute. That's not enough because you're not saying why. Why did they meet that? Or why did they fail to meet that criteria, right? You're just restating what the law says, right? So you've got to add a little something more to provide a basis for how you're creating that tie between the fact and the criteria or eligibility. So this is just sort of a summary. You need to make a record to support the decision, and you need to highlight this by specific criteria of whatever statute we're considering that has been met or not met in supporting that decision. Again, avoid conclusory statements. Use deliberations to mention any specific facts that you're putting weight on and tie them back to that specific criteria within the statute. The reason a lot of this is important is kind of what I'll get into in the next step, because we're just the commission would just be sort of an intermediate step in a series of remedies that a particular user of one of our facilities or utilities can utilize. So it can be a decision by the Public Works Commission affirming or reversing staff, can likewise then be appealed up from the Public Works Commission to City Council and or as far as what's called judicial review. So they might file a petition with the district court saying, I think the city screwed up here. So the reason it's important to develop this record to avoid the conclusory statements and build a solid record is because if something were to come from the commission, go up to City Council, the view that City Council has is very narrow. They have to look at the Public Works Commission and determine, was the Public Works Commission decision arbitrary, i.e. made without a rational basis, or kind of erroneous, clearly erroneous, right? Otherwise, generally speaking, council is going to support the decision that the Public Works Commission made as long as it's reasonable and supported by the record. And then when I talk about judicial review, if it were to go up on judicial review, it's not really so much the council deliberations that are going to be the subject of scrutiny. It would be the deliberations before the Public Works Commission as far as did they get it right? And because the review of City Council is so narrow, the real meat of that deliberation or rationale should be found in whatever Public Works Commission discussion is had on the record. Some of this is taken from other statutes because I'll be honest, in regards to our particular statutes under Public Works, there's not always all this criteria really cleanly laid out, but we still have an obligation to provide procedural due process. So this is where I'm talking about guidance from ordinance might come from different sections, but it's illustrative in what kind of procedure we would need to use here in front of the commission. And this is where I'm talking about that we need to, Public Works Commission in reviewing a decision by staff should find some error, right? And so that's kind of where they didn't get it right because they misapplied, misinterpreted, maybe legally, maybe factually, or whatever it may be, but you're defining some error that they have made in order to reverse or modify a decision. And then in terms of moving from here up to City Council has to find that Public Works Commission made some error in approving or reversing or modifying a staff level decision. And so that's again where the role is very limited, and there's the only basis upon which they can find error is if the Public Works Commission violated some constitutional state or city law, exceeded its statutory authority, did this on sort of unlawful procedure, was arbitrary, meaning like without rational basis or in disregard of facts and circumstances, or is not supported by substantial evidence. So unless City Council finds one of those things, the Public Works Commission decision is the one that stands. And I want to pull out and draw some attention to unlawful procedure. That's partly why we're having this training, because primarily what it comes down to is notice to the appellant as far as what is happening and why, and having an opportunity to be heard in front of the commission. That's at its very basic core what procedural due process is. And so we want to ensure that we've provided them the opportunity to be publicly heard in front of the commission and have their sort of quote unquote day in court. So we kind of already talked about this procedural due process, so I won't reiterate a lot of that here. But again, there's that difference between substantive and procedural due process. And I kind of got ahead of myself, so I already covered this, where really the minimum requirements are just notice of a hearing and an opportunity to be heard. There are some things to consider in terms of how we do procedural due process beyond just that notice and hearing. So these are 4 different things that would need to be in kind of in the back of your mind as commissioners when deliberating on any kind of decision. So I'll go over each of these, but basically it's ex parte communications, considering facts outside the record, conflicts of interest, and ensuring that there's a fairness in hearing procedures. When we're talking about ex parte communication, part of what an appellant is afforded is to make sure that the decision is made quote unquote on the record. So if there's information that you as a commissioner have independently that has not been brought up in the public sphere, so to speak, that may be considered ex parte communications. So for example, our user who got their sewers disconnected decides to call up Chair Gravatt, try to bend his ear about all the reasons he's correct. That would need to be disclosed by Chair Gravatt on the record to make sure it cures any influence he might have had outside of the public hearing, where other commissioners have the ability to weigh in, where city staff can answer or rebut that, and or where that appellant has the ability to bring that information forward. This can also include emails, phone calls, passing on the street if it happens to be a party who is subject to that appeal. The problems is with those types of ex parte communications is again, not knowing what information is influencing or weighing in on the decision. And again, making sure that the decision is limited to what's on the record and can be captured. The best way to cure this is, like I mentioned, disclosing it on the record, the names of the people who you've had that ex parte communication with, the relationship to the item that you're hearing, kind of a summary of what the contact was, and any documents or other information that has been provided during that ex parte communication. That doesn't always cure it. If the information, we'll talk about this a little bit more with conflict of interest. If the information is of such a nature or weight, it may be that that commissioner needs to recuse themselves from a vote. But generally speaking, the disclosure is your best way to go. The next consideration is facts outside the record. This can come up more often than you might think, and can happen somewhat inadvertently. So going forward with our example of a disconnection of sewer, maybe this is a restaurant that you often frequent. Maybe the owner is your neighbor. Maybe you drive by all the time and you saw the big closed sign and some nasty sign to the city about the disconnecting the sewer. Those are things that you're observing outside the record that might influence or weigh in on your decision. And again, those are things that, and then also oftentimes it's just curiosity, right? You want to know, where is this location? And you look it up on Google Maps, or you're trying to find other information about this on the internet, or, the Idaho Press Tribune did some sort of press release about it. And so you look that up and you read it. These are all facts that are outside of what might be a record on or in the hearing, and should be considered before the commission. So if those are facts that you've come into contact with, or that you've actively sought, but kind of inadvertently, again, it's the best thing to do is early disclosure, put it on the record prior to a staff report, prior to any testimony that the appellant might give, and make sure that it's considered before that hearing is closed, so to speak, so that both parties, being the city and the appellant, have the opportunity to address or rebut that information that a commissioner may have come into contact with. So again, this is just a kind of summary of steer clear of new facts and observations during deliberation. Make sure that you disclose that early and often if something such as an ex parte communication or fact outside the record has come up. And I alluded to this briefly before, where sometimes we have what arises as a conflict of interest. So in an ex parte communication, or if a fact outside the record has really significantly altered a position, or that relationship is of such a close nature that there's a sense that your objectivity or independence in making the decision might be questioned, then the conflict of interest can arise. So there are two different ways this is defined in Boise City Code. One is an actual conflict of interest that really has to do with your financial interest of yourself, a household member, or a business with which you're associated. And the apparent conflict is really where your objectivity is just questioned. Like, is this influencing you enough that you're not going to make an objective decision? When these things arise, you must disclose them on the record. If it's an actual conflict of interest, you cannot participate in the decision or the vote. And if it's an apparent conflict of interest, it's something that you can confer with legal ahead of time to determine, the extent to which you feel there might be questions to your objectivity. But it also really is kind of a personal call in terms of how influenced do you feel, and do you feel that you can make an objective decision on the record? And if you can, just disclose that conflict of interest and state the reasons why you still can feel objective. Otherwise, if you're going to recuse yourself, you don't necessarily have to give an explanation as to why. You just simply say, here's an apparent conflict of interest for this reason, and I'm going to recuse myself from this vote and deliberations. In terms of an actual conflict of interest, there's just a real quick exception. If you get something of value less than $50, that's not considered a conflict of interest. It's a de minimis thing. And so that wouldn't be something that you'd have to recuse yourself on. So in our example, say you happen to get a $25 gift card from a neighbor for the restaurant that closed, whose sewer disconnection you're about to decide, that's not a conflict of interest, having received that gift card. And the last thing we want to cover in terms of how we do this is just fairness in hearing procedures. Again, stick to the code, what the criteria and eligibility factors are for whatever decision Public Works staff made. Any new information that comes out on the hearing or during the hearing, we need to give staff and the appellant the opportunity to address or rebut that new information. This is a rather unusual thing, especially for Public Works Commission. You might find it's more common in Planning and Zoning Commission. But if you feel you don't have enough information on the record to make a decision, the commission could decide to defer a decision, ask and articulate what additional information might need to be provided, and then have a continued hearing at a later date. And we can go over some of what these considerations of a deferral would need to be if and when that arises. I won't take the time to go over that tonight. Just again, this is not necessarily a routine request. And if that were to come up, it's something that I would just suggest the commissioners bring to the attention of staff and or legal ahead of time so we can go over the required considerations and whether or not it might qualify for a deferral. All right, before I go on to the ballot bond election and conduct during the elections, are there any other questions in that really brief overview of appeals?
Commissioners, any questions about that presentation? Hearing none, I think we can move on.
Okay. So I'm going to keep this relatively brief with regards to conduct during the bond election. And the reason being, and this is just again, sort of framing the issue, is that there's a different standard for staff and the city kind of as a whole than there is for commissioners in your capacity as a commissioner. So to give you a little, I have the bullet points that you really need to pay attention to on the slide, and I'll just speak a little bit to following up on some of the things that Director Burgos first initially stated. With regards to city and use of city resources, we by statute are prohibited from allocating any of those resources or funds to advocate for or against a bond that's on the ballot. So where we as a city are permissible or have permissible use, so to speak, of funds is to encourage the vote, just generally get voter turnout up, to educate on what a yes vote means, what a no vote means, to ensure that there's adequate information and factual information about what the bond means and what the approval or denial would result in. So that's where Colin and Director Burgos were talking about sort of what those campaign materials are. And I use campaign only in the sense of educating about the ballot and what the result of the bond passing or failing would do for increase in sewer rates. With regards to city officials and commissioners, so this is where I'm speaking more directly to you, that you as commissioners do have the ability to make statements as to your position and opinion regarding a bond election. The caveat here is, again, where we're taking these two bullet points in consideration with each other. You cannot use city property, public funds, or public resources in that capacity to advocate for or against this ballot measure. You as an individual commissioner, part of the reason you are appointed as a commissioner, and not just this commission, but the Public Works Commission or the library board or whatnot, is we bring you on as volunteers for your expertise and your opinions as it relates to city business. You maintain or retain that capacity to state your opinions as individual commissioners, with that caveat of just making sure you're not using public funds or resources to do so. So that's where on the second bullet point, I state that you may spend the personal time outside of your duties and responsibilities to the city in advocating a position, and you may spend your own private funds in support or opposition of this ballot. If there's a question about whether some conduct is crossing a line or maybe walking that line, we would encourage you to follow up with staff or with legal to vet that or ask questions. Anything else from the commissioners on that point?
Any questions or comments, commissioners?
Chair Gravatt, this is Councilmember Halliburton.
Yes, go ahead.
Hey, Mary, I guess one question would be if folks from the media were to reach out to commissioners or council members in asking for a comment or their thoughts. I guess my understanding from this is that there really wouldn't be any issues with providing that outside of like if they were on the clock or inside their professional duties. Is that correct?
Chair Gravatt and Councilmember Halliburton, that is correct. There's some support in case law for that specifically, and so I want to read some language that might also help illustrate this. That essentially an elected official, and I would say also a commissioner in this particular circumstance, may make any public statements or express their opinion or support regarding a bond election, as long as it's an ordinary course of their position. Spending time simply for the purpose of campaigning may require a reimbursement of time spent or funds spent. So I recognize that there's gray area in that response, but if it's just in an ordinary course of a press interview or something like that, there should not be an issue with you individually as a commissioner or council member stating your opinion.
Perfect. Thank you.
Any other questions or comments from the commissioners? Hearing none. Thank you for that presentation. That was illuminating.
Thank you, commissioners.
And that will bring us to the next item on our agenda, which is our second session going over the geothermal utility plan. And I'm looking forward to some robust conversation among the commissioners on this. And
Yeah,
I will
thank you,
turn it over
Chair.
to you.
Thank you, Chair Gravatt. Yeah, we really want the commissioners to give us feedback, our thoughts. We have very specific breakpoints in the discussion. John and our city engineer, Jim Pardee, are going to present slides, take breaks, create discussion opportunities for y'all. We really want to hear your perspectives. This is an important topic for us, and one that we hope you'll enjoy. And we're going to be in listening mode for big chunks of this. So thank you for the opportunity. Now I'll turn it over to John and Jim.
Thank you. Good evening, Chair Gravatt, members of the commission. Again, my name is John Gunnarsson. I'm a civil engineer in our engineering department, and one of my primary roles is overseeing our geothermal program. To my right, Jim Pardee. He's joining me this evening to basically just kind of help moderate and facilitate discussion. As questions and discussion come up, could be answered by either one of us. And I believe Colin may chime in as well to assist. So that's a little bit of a recap starting. Last time we met back in June, we reviewed the geothermal system in a whole. We kind of provided an overall summary of the system. We talked a little bit about the history, a little bit about the capacity, our customer base. We also highlighted a few specific challenges, a few opportunities of the program. But tonight, we're going to transition a little bit from where we have been and where we're at to where we want to go. And again, as we've alluded, we're hoping that this is going to be very, very interactive. Rather than us telling you where we landed, we want to make sure we build this program together as a team. Although we have quite a bit to cover tonight, I'll try to get through some of this quick to make sure we have plenty of time for this dialogue. Now, keeping in mind that this geothermal utility, it's a very unique utility. It comes with its own set of challenges, and that's why we are approaching this one a little bit differently than other utility plans. So looking at the summary above, we are going to start with essentially establishing this overarching vision, mission, values, kind of set the bearing on the compass of where we want this program heading. And then once we discuss that, we will transition into the strategic planning framework and how we're going to implement this and possibly any resources needed going forward. So again, basically tonight we're asking if this utility plan that we're going to present to you seems to be starting and going on the right foot. If we're missing anything, if anything specifically sticks out one way or another, are there any questions before I get started?
Are there any questions or clarification from the commissioners before we get started? Hearing none, I'll turn it back to you.
Okay, thank you. So a good first step in any utility plan is to clearly identify where a program is heading. again, setting this bearing on our compass. So we all understand where the program's heading and all of our actions align towards that goal. And the first step in doing this is we want to establish this overall vision. This is the overarching principle of what does this utility stand for. On the screen, you'll see here is staff's view of where this program stands and where it should be going. And I'll read it. This is our all-encompassing vision of what this utility should stand for. It is to provide attractive, reliable, sustainable, clean energy to the community of Boise. Now, based on everything that you know of our geothermal program, everything that we've talked about in the past and that you're aware of, I'd like to now take a minute and pause, allow us to brainstorm and see what naturally kind of collaboratively comes up as the commission's vision of this utility. Maybe there's some similarities, maybe they'll match, maybe there'll be differences. We'd like to really incorporate them. And then following this exercise, we will go back and basically make sure the rest of this utility plan that we're going to present to you still aligns and still matches with this vision. This is one of those forks in the roads where there's staff's interpretation of it, but we want to see what leadership's interpretation of it is. So with that, well, actually, before I open it up for discussion, let me just describe ours a little bit. So we provided this vision statement of attractive. Okay, attractive is in, that this utility is appealing to customers. It's appealing to the community. Maybe it has something to do with rates. Maybe it has something to do with the environmental impacts. Maybe it's the cool thing to do. We want to make sure it's reliable. Making sure this is a utility that buildings can trust, can rely on in a time of need. We want to make sure it's sustainable. Pretty self-explanatory. Sustainable is, we want to make sure this utility is around for future generations to come. Clean energy, basically referring to a lot of these carbon and climate initiatives. Geothermal is a very clean energy as is, and we want to continue. And then we put in to the community of Boise. And this one is up for a little of interpretation because although the geothermal program primarily serves the downtown core, we recognize and understand that the benefits that are being received are community-wide. And looking forward, this utility could become something bigger and larger, which we'll talk about later today, which could even have a larger impact to the community. So with that, Chair Gravatt, if you don't mind, if we could open it up for discussion. And, again, basically, what is the overall vision that the commission sees this utility going forward?
Awesome. Thank you. And I will turn it over to Commissioner Crowley for first thoughts. Commissioner Crowley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. John, it's good to see you. And thank you for your presentation. With respect to your vision statement, a couple of questions came to mind. One was, and this is really based on some of your prior presentations that we've enjoyed over the past few years. To me, you have a couple of other elements that might be worth considering. One being affordability as part of your vision statement, providing an affordable. And I'm just looking at this as from kind of a utility commercial perspective. So it is affordable vis-a-vis other sources, and we can talk about the natural gas conundrum that you deal with continually. But affordability, competitive, plus, it's a hallmark of the city of Boise. I think it's, we talk about the Boise River and some of the other inherent amenities that we have and enjoy in this community. And I think the work that you are doing with geothermal is just as important. It's another marker for the city. Some other countries, make this a huge deal, and I think we haven't done enough to really emphasize the value proposition that the geothermal system provides to this community. So my comments are, maybe think about in terms of your vision statement, affordable, competitive, in addition to what you've already got outlined there.
Chair, Commissioner Crawley, thank you for that. Those are great recommendations.
Awesome. Yes, thank you, Commissioner Crowley. That you said one thing that really stuck out to me, that the geothermal system that we have is a hallmark of the city of Boise. And I think that is, just to drive home your statement even more, I think leveraging this unique large asset as a defining feature of who we are is a good long-term vision that we could have for this asset.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I really believe that to be the case, and it is the largest geothermal system in the country, and it's I don't know what our limits are in terms of capacity for expansion. And I know John's mentioned before that they've expanded or increased our water rights for the geothermal system. It's not clear to me just how far that can go and just how that can fit into the service area for the geothermal system. But those are other areas I'd like to hear about. And also, by the way, I'm sorry, I had another train of thought and it just came back to me, and that was, this certainly fits well with the city's commitment to clean energy and the climate change initiative that has been initiated by the mayor and the city council. I think those are things that, as we see things happening throughout our country, and we've experienced it here this summer, that we really needs to get more and more attention. And this is certainly an outstanding example of the city's response to those particular issues.
Great feedback. Thank you. I will open it up to our other commissioners for more comments.
Chair Gravatt?
Yes, go ahead.
I have a question. So we referenced the fact that the geothermal is really only, it's really in one part of town right now, and so it's not accessible to everyone else. And this is more just a question based on my own ignorance of it. But are there any public amenities that utilize geothermal? So anyone else from the public can enjoy it, and not just people who are specifically in those buildings that have the infrastructure.
Commissioner, council member, great question. We will be discussing that a little bit more today. A big focus on our geothermal program moving forward is we'd like to incorporate more alternative uses, innovation of the program, and we're going to talk about that a little bit. Talk about some questions Chair had at our last session. But I believe that there are opportunities to engage the community more as a whole. And again, we will talk about that here in a little bit.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Chair Gravatt. A word that came up for me was stewardship, and it comes up with the reliable and sustainable. It is so important to me that we take this amazing resource and be very smart and think about the long-term path. So that word means a lot to me, and that we would do a good job stewarding, being good stewards of handling this resource.
Chair Gravatt, I had a follow-up question for Commissioner Crowley, if that's all right.
Sure, go ahead.
I was thinking about your comment, Commissioner Crowley, about kind of getting clarity on kind of the water rights and how we can expand the system. Would something like, this is just throwing out ideas, would something like, we talk about millions of gallons of water that's available through the water, but that's kind of an abstract concept. Would like converting that to square footage or number of buildings on an annual basis, those types of metrics be helpful to frame how we might expand the system, with the caveat there's a lot of variables there, but we could kind of come up with some baseline thoughts on what that means.
I think that would be helpful, Steve. Another thought I'm continuing to look at John's first slide is, this is an energy source that's emissions free, carbon, zero carbon emissions for this kind of energy. Something that people, I think, are becoming more and more aware of and attuned to, and I think that might be something else to think about. In terms of expansion, when you look at the system map for the geothermal system, it sort of hits some corridors, the main part of downtown, and then swings south and east back towards Boise State. And I'm just wondering if you were to draw a map with boundaries of the service area that are defined by where the system actually is and the services that are being provided to the customers within those boundaries, it gives us a better idea of just what the service territory looks like and where the opportunities for expansion might be, looking at kind of more as a map and identifying specific spots that may be easy targets for expansion or additional customers and more usage. So that was one thing I had in mind. The other, in terms of the square footage, the types of buildings or applications, with all the new apartment buildings and high-rise buildings going in downtown, are we aggressively pursuing those facilities as customers for geothermal, at least if not in whole, perhaps in part? What are we looking at in terms of options for different service levels, and what the requirements might be for those customers, potential customers?
Chair Gravatt, Commissioner Crowley, I think, first of all, thanks for answering my question. That's helpful. And I think John's going to cover or get to your question on or point about regarding the map and kind of areas to expand. So I think he's going to cover that in a second, but thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks, Steve.
Chair, Commissioner, two things. I'm really inspired by your initiative to grow the system, and that's going to be a whole tier that we're going to be talking about tonight, is how to grow the system. I'm also still resonating in one of your first comments on just the pride of the system and how we need to be incorporating more pride into this, because it is something we are proud for, and it is a big hallmark of Boise. So your comments are loud and clear, and hopefully we can talk a little bit more through this tonight. And kind of jumping ahead a little bit, we're hoping that this will remain an interactive session, and we're hoping to hear and take the comments tonight and then come back and maybe with another iteration of this, maybe set up some kind of working document if we need to be sharing information back and forth offline. But this is all very, very good information.
Awesome. Yes. And I think that we can keep taking notes about ideas that we have for a vision statement as we learn more through the rest of this presentation.
Perfect. Okay, so under a vision statement, we're gonna break it down a little bit further. We're gonna see kind of a pyramid of schemes here, and so we're kind of starting at the top of the pyramid with this vision, and then we're going to go to the mission, and then last we're going to talk about some core values that are meant to the geothermal program, and then later on when we talk about the strategic plan, we're going to see a kind of another pyramid type vision. So next is our mission statements. Again, we just want to make sure that these mission statements do align, kind of point to the top of the pyramid, to the vision. Currently, we have landed on 3 of these. These are a little bit tricky, kind of finding that right balance of being specific enough, but yet also general enough to capture all aspects of the geothermal program. So these are 3. Again, these are subject to change based on where we land with this vision statement, but just reading through these. Number 1, maximizing the use of this geothermal resource to reduce carbon emitting energy sources. Number 2, to seek growth, diversity, and alternative uses of this resource, in part to support financial stability. And 3, to strive to be the most innovative geothermal city in the United States. Again, that's, if you don't mind, Chair, if we could then pause for discussion again about these, do these seem right? What is most important to the commission that maybe we could be capturing here?
Awesome, thank you. And I will kick off the conversation with maybe a reordering of these bullet points and leading with the innovation component. Looking at the user end and at sort of finding ways to persuade or to incentivize development that integrates geothermal elements. I think leaning on the innovative elements of geothermal, as well as the financial components of geothermal, might be the bigger selling points in getting users to adopt this method, rather than sort of the city goal of achieving carbon neutrality, of moving toward more renewable energy sources and that direction. So as we look into engaging with end users, I think those may be the more persuasive components. And I would open it up to the commission for other feedback on these mission statements.
Sorry, carry on. Oh, okay,
Commissioner
thank
Morgan.
you, Chair Gravatt.
Go ahead.
I would like to say that the 3rd mission statement, strive to be the most innovative geothermal city in the United States, is probably the one that stood out the most to me. And I think that, dovetailing off of your comments, it seeks to just promote geothermal as it is, instead of talking about the carbon emitting uses that are currently being implemented. It's talking about where we're looking to go and what sustainable actions that we're hoping to achieve. And so I like that positive outlook, that achievable outcome, that thing that we're looking forward to. And so that's why that one stood out the most to me. And I'm hoping that it's basically, I feel that it really decreases the attention to carbon emitting things, is basically where I'm going with this, is that it is focusing on the positives and turning us to looking for that solution and opening more opportunities and innovation in that solution.
Awesome. Yes, thank you for that feedback.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Commissioner Crowley.
If I'm not interrupting anyone, I would concur with Abigail's comments and yours as well. I think the 3rd bullet item is the one that really has the most appeal to me as well. And it's not just a matter of, when I think about it, as being the most innovative, but also being the most efficient geothermal city in the United States. So, because it is, I think, just that. It is innovative, and it's also a very efficient in terms of the way it's run and the way the applications have been developed, and the way the service has been provided. So there's we speak to the technology, but also the interface of that technology with our community. And what is important is not only that we're innovative, but it's also efficient. And then we can speak to the other 2 points as being kind of subpoints of that overarching mission comment as outlined in the 3rd bullet.
Awesome. Thank you.
Chair Gravatt, I have a comment as well. And I don't know if it's something that we can include right now, but I think certainly something we should strive for. And so aim to include would be equity of access. You know, I think if I try and put myself in the shoes of just, you know, the average working class person who lives in the area, you think of geothermal and you automatically think Warm Springs, you think some of the, you know, the parts of town that are the wealthier, more privileged parts of town. And so maybe people don't, you know, I'm not sure, this is just my assumption, but I wonder if there's this connection that people make with demographics, and is there a way that we can provide access and education and make people feel like this is something that really is for them and not just for the wealthy?
Yeah, thank you for that question and that perspective. I think that's really important to consider moving forward as we build out the asset. And I don't know if if staff has any comments on this consideration moving forward that could clarify our conversation.
Chair, Commissioners, specifically on providing access education to all demographics, that is a little bit difficult being in a downtown area where we're not serving residentials at this point. But you know, it's definitely not something that we're trying to serve a certain area versus another. It's just naturally, organically grown to serving a downtown. It's a commercial heating district the way it currently stands. And that's something else we can be looking at and talking about when we're talking about growth of it, is maybe, I mean, we talked last time when we were looking at kind of our customer base and the bigger impacts, the bigger energy offset, these uses for some of these large buildings compared to smaller buildings. And then if we go residential, they're going to get even smaller. But absolutely. I mean, we are ramping up our education side of it. I mean, a big portion of our watershed and different tours and things we're doing cover all demographics. The service area does stay similar to where it's sourced from, and it is sourced here downtown. So we're not going to be able to get to Southwest Boise with this current heating district. So let me be clear here, is we are kind of in this fork in the road. And I'm hearing a lot of consensus here on looking at the innovation side of it. And innovation may lead to something besides a heating district in the future. And if so, then it seems like if we do go more down this innovative path, then we will be able to touch more people with it. Currently as a heating district, we have a geographic limit of where hot water can be sent to.
Sure. Awesome. Yeah, go ahead. If you want to stand up to the mic so we can hear you over Zoom.
Thank you. To kind of follow up on what John's saying is, historically, this is what makes this plan so exciting. And I think, you know, for the commission, you know, you're going to get to develop something brand new. A lot of the things that come to the commission have this historical kind of legacy, and it's just the way we do things. And this is how we're doing it. And you're kind of seeing that with the water renewal utility plan. It's kind of breaking down those barriers. And now we're trying to take it in a different direction. There's no difference here, even with this utility plan with the geothermal. And, you know, as John alluded to, historically, it has been just like a heating district, but a big part of the strategic plan and utility plan is looking at that innovation. And I mean, maybe someday it's not even a heating district. Maybe someday it's something completely different. So I applaud the thoughts and this very forward thinking. This is exactly why we wanted to have your fingerprints on it and to give us the direction. Because as you can see, sometimes when we talk, it's easy for us to get, this is the way we've always done things, you know, and so what we're going to really rely on is the commission to make sure to pull us out of that and make sure that we're looking bigger and broader. And that's the power of this group. So these comments are great. And I think the innovation part is, that's the fun part of this. Maybe not so much for somebody like me, because I'm more of the kind of run the day-to-day business part, but with these continued comments and that focus, just because we're doing it today doesn't mean that we need to continue. So I continue to kind of like to hear these innovative ideas, because I've already heard several that we haven't. So thank you.
Awesome. Yes, thank you for that clarification. It looks like Commissioner Ellis.
Thank you, Chair Kavat. I don't know if there's such a phrase as enthusiastic ad nauseum, but I want to also say something about the third bullet and innovative. Is that I smiled when he said the word. Has a lot of connotation with me. Just working for HP for a long time, we used invent as our phrase for a long time, and that was a long-term facility out there at HP that was had a lot to do with Boise. So what I wanted to say is that innovative can be looked at in a lot of different ways in the delivery and how it's financed and all that. So I really think that was a wise word to use. And it's also opportunistic. Again, you're looking at every nook and cranny about how to go about it, where to go about it, who gets it. So just wanted to also weigh in on that one again one more time.
Thank you. Any other?
Chair,
Yes.
yeah, sorry, I just wanted to clarify my earlier comment. I don't think I was necessarily asking for, what does it look like in terms of how are we going to make this equitable, more sort of a general, in our innovation, we are considering equity, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Thank you for the clarification. Any other questions or comments from the commission?
Mr. Chair?
Yes, Commissioner Crowley.
One other thing, this is just an aside question. I'd be interested in hearing about any new technologies that the industry in general has seen in the past 3 to 5 years that has some applicability for our system here. I don't hear much about technology in geothermal like we do with solar, but the costs of solar have come down considerably in the past 10 years. I'm wondering if the same thing is happening with geothermal. Just a question.
Chair, Commissioner Crawley, thank you for the question. I could probably spend a couple hours talking about new technologies of geothermal. Geothermal is one that we're going to be hearing more and more about in the upcoming decade. It is getting national, worldwide attention from the federal level, from state levels. I see geothermal similar to where you saw solar and wind 10 or 20 years ago, where the technology was there, but as we're watching it, it's getting more efficient, it's getting cheaper, it's getting more widely used. And really the ongoing message that I keep hearing about geothermal is, well, with wind and solar, the wind has to be blowing or the sun has to be shining. You put in a small geothermal unit and it's pumping along 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Specifically, Commissioner Crawley, we did just meet with a couple folks 2-3 weeks ago. There are technologies out there now that we could be taking this low temperature geothermal water and producing electricity with it. It is low scale electricity. We're not putting in a big power plant, but it would be enough to offset our own production, or you can put it into a building and it could offset that building. This is something that we're staying involved in the geothermal community. We're talking with all different national labs and partners. We want to make sure that we are kind of forefront on anything that's being innovative or being put to use, or what this low temperature geothermal water could be. Because again, we're kind of in this middle area where typically you need hotter water to be producing electricity and to have some of these other benefits. We're in an area where it's mainly been district heating over the last century. But again, like wind and solar, I believe the tides are changing and we're going to be hearing more and more about it. And then as we talk more about innovation, one of our identified specific tasks is to develop these innovation teams to look at these different technologies, see how to best implement them, see how we can integrate with other departments and other city goals and initiatives. So I don't want to keep going on technologies, but there are a lot of emerging technologies. There are some out there, and we're staying in tune with all of them.
Thank you,
I look
John.
forward to learning more.
Yeah.
Any other comments or questions from the commission? Hearing none, I think that you really hit the head, heart, and the wallet. Those three big appeals on those three
Absolutely.
points. So thank you.
Okay. Well, Chair, let's take it down one more level here. We've talked about the mission, the vision, and now just a couple core values of our geothermal program. And I'm going to just read these rather quickly. They are a little bit wordy, but again, these are staff's first interpretation of them. And again, I'd like to see if there's any other core values that either resonate with you or maybe that we're missing. Number one, protection of the health and safety. This is for both employees and our public. Number two, recognize the city's role in geothermal aquifer management and provide responsible resource management and environmental stewardship. Three, to embrace economic, social, and environmental factors to help guide our decision-making on these. Four, to manage our financial resources in a responsible and equitable manner for all geothermal users and for our community. Five, remain an active community partner, seeking meaningful public involvement and input to provide purposeful education and outreach. And six is to lead innovation and alternative uses of this natural resource. Now, as I read through those, I do sense that we're capturing some of these that we talked about on the last slide when we were talking about mission statements. And so it sounds like we are all talking the same language. It's just how do we order these, and which one takes priority versus which one should be a little bit lower in the weeds. So we've kind of gone through this. We could open it up again. Yeah, if that's okay, Chair. Let's go ahead and open it up one last time to finish going through these vision, mission, values. And then after that, we will move into the strategic framework.
Yeah, more than okay. And I would hazard an initial guess that several of us might recommend that we put lead innovation and alternative uses of this natural resource up toward the top.
Yes.
But I would open it up to the commission for comments. Commissioner Ellis.
Thank you. Yeah, I would put innovation. I would put the number 6 up closer to 1, but does it have to be second? I do think number 1 should stay number 1. I really think to me, that's a bottom line. So I'm glad that was number 1 for me. And right now I'd have to look at it for a couple more minutes to kind of see if I needed to rearrange any other ones.
Sounds good. We can take a minute to read through again. But please do let me know if you have any questions or comments as we are letting this percolate.
Chair Gravatt, too,
Yes.
we're not looking to get to an end goal today. This was, I mean, that'd be unfair. You know, our expectation is not to walk away with a vision, mission, value statement. Our opportunity was to get the discussion going, get the thoughts going. And then towards the end of the presentation, we can talk about ways to kind of, give you some time to kind of think about, provide maybe some channels to kind of provide information back and forth. And, I think what we would recommend is we'll take what we heard here, take another crack at it, get it out to the commission, and that way you have some time to kind of digest. So appreciate the comments. That kind of sets it, but this is far from over in our mind, at least.
Perfect.
Thank you.
It looks like Commissioner Crowley has a question or comment. Go ahead.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. These are all worthy statements. I was wondering, John, if it'd be possible for you to distribute copies of your slide presentation to the members of the commission so that we could kind of have a hard copy to work on or scratch on between now and the next meeting. I think it'd be really helpful for us to have this so we can really spend some time on it. If you don't mind doing that.
Chair, Commissioner, absolutely. We will definitely provide something that we can share back and forth. And until I get these out to you, these are all included in the draft utility plan that has been provided. So hopefully you have access to them, but we'll make sure we get this part out specifically.
Thank you.
All right. If there are no other questions or comments on these, maybe we can jump into the strategy portion.
Doesn't show up very well. Okay. I'm just looking at the slide now. There is kind of an infographic associated here. It's not showing up on the screen very well, but we're going to be talking about the framework of the utility plan going forward. And again, we're going to be talking about kind of this triangle approach. But here we're talking from the ground up, basically setting a foundation and then building upon it. Okay. So first, let's talk a little bit about our strategic plan framework. What we did is first we scoured all aspects of our geothermal program, from all the baseline documents that we talked last June with you guys, to speaking with operators, maintenance staff, building owners, addressing our known needs, even comparing this utility with other utilities to kind of see what some best practices are. Identifying all of our known opportunities, all of our known challenges. And then what we did is we developed specific action items, specific tasks to address these. And these tasks then are grouped into three main categories here. Starting at the base of this triangle, the category is existing customers and customer operation, or in system operation, excuse me. And again, basically that is building the foundation. The following three slides are going to get into more depth on each one of these. So I'm not going to go too far into each one. The next tier up is growth, growing our system. And the top tier is innovation. Now, as I go through these, although we're calling existing customers and system operation our foundation, that does not mean that we're going to focus solely on that one before we move on to the next one, These are all tasks that we're going to be working on in parallel. We're going to be doing some innovation, some growth, and making sure our house is in order all at the same time. There are different priorities for each one, of course, but this is definitely not a linear approach. Something that's not shown here, this is also part of the draft utility plan, is we've developed what we're calling this task matrix. And basically it breaks it into these three categories, but then it'll break it into further subcategories. And if you want to take it all the way, it lists out close to 80 specific tasks that we have identified that we know we need to move forward for the success of this utility. Now, again, after today, we're going to want to revisit that and make sure they still all align with our vision, mission, values. But it sounds like we're getting a lot of similarities, and I think a lot of these will still align. But now that these are kind of grouped and prioritized, we're having a discussion with leadership. We're wanting to make sure that staff's interpretation is merged with the leadership's interpretation, and then we're really anxious to really start implementing some of this and really start building this foundation, looking at growth, looking at innovation. But before we actually start addressing these, we want to just make sure we're starting our foot off in the right direction. Lastly on this slide, I think it goes without saying, is this entire utility plan, it's going to be a living document. As more challenges or opportunities are known, as we start mulling through some of these specific tasks, we might learn more, we might realize some are less of a priority. And so this is subject to change, but this is definitely a good starting point for us all. Okay, so starting at the base of this triangle, we're referring to this as the foundation of the program. Basically, we want to ensure that we have our house in order and that all of our existing customers are taken care of. Here we identify tasks that are related to both customer satisfaction and our system operation. Things under customer satisfaction include, the customer service, providing a reliable system, making sure buildings are using this water most efficiently and for the best uses. And then on the other side of the coin, the administration side of it is get our asset management programs up and running. Make sure we understand what we have and what we need to be doing to our existing assets, from pipelines to pumps to also looking at our rates, internally. Some of this internal housekeeping that we need to make sure that we have in order. Again, I keep kind of alluding to this foundation. Make sure we have something solid to build upon. Other parts of this foundation, are the financial side of it, which, how we manage our rates, how we manage our assets, all the financials of this program. The box on the right side are just a few of many of the tasks that are identified. I think we've landed on approximately 28 tasks under this tier. I wasn't planning on reading through these. They can be found in this task matrix. We can go through them if we need to for discussion. But in general, I guess let's take another one of these pauses. In general, does this framework seem to make sense? Does it align? Are we focusing on some of these right areas? Are there any other priorities that we see as a group here that would really help make a good foundation for building any kind of utility or any kind of program? Chair.
So if I am understanding your questions correctly, your first question is this approach, this pyramid approach to listing out the action items, an appropriate approach for this asset? And then the second question is then diving into this approach, into the base layer. Are these appropriate items within this foundation?
Sure, Gravatt. Yeah, maybe not quite into that detail. The biggest thing we're trying to do is just establish kind of our strategy moving forward. And there again, it's based on this kind of tiered event. Mm-hmm. And, there again, we're thinking, taking care of the existing system as it is today. There's going to be a lot of discussion then about growth. That's the next level of the pyramid. And then innovation is at the top. So really the focus is on those three. Is there something else? Is there another layer of that pyramid that we need? And then there again, as you're going to see at the kind of the last slide, we're just looking for a direction, a nod to say, yep, that sounds reasonable, or maybe we need to look at X, Y, or Z. And then as we said before, it's a living document. There's going to be several policy discussions that we're going to come back to. The intent is not to dive into the 28 tasks today. That was just to give you an idea of kind of where our mind was.
Gotcha. Thanks for the clarification. And I will open it up to the commission for any initial comments while I'm still noodling through. Looks like Commissioner Ellis.
Chair Gravatt, under customer satisfaction, I really looked at those hard, and the only other things I can think of that I think might come under those is ease of use and quality. So quality, I think, probably comes under the system reliability, and the ease of use. I don't know if that is considered. Anyway, those are the two that come out to me when I'm really thinking hard about customer satisfaction that I would add. I don't know if you already meant those to go underneath the other items already listed.
Thank you.
Commissioner Crowley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. John, as you are thinking about your relationship with your customers, new or prospective ones, is there a way that you can equate their geothermal service to tons of CO2 that's reduced or not emitted as a result of using geothermal in lieu of natural gas or some other fuel that would be emitting greenhouse gases?
Chair, Commissioner Crawley. Yes, absolutely. If you recall, it was about 3 years ago. I believe you were part of this with us. We sent letters out to all of our customers from the mayor's office, basically as a thank you for using this clean utility. And in there, we equated how much water they used to an equivalent of how much CO2 has been has not been used. We also made the comparison to, by using this amount of water, it would equate to X number of trees being planted. And then I think we even had a third one on there of using this amount of water would also equate to removing so many vehicles off the road for that year. There are definitely ways that we can equate it. With that said, there are a couple assumptions that we have to build into each one because there's just assumptions on how much heat each building takes off the water and how efficient would their natural gas boiler actually be. But we can get relatively close, and yes, we can equate this to individual buildings or a system in the whole.
Thanks, John. I had forgotten about some of that work that you did 3 years ago. And the reason I mention it again was not just because of lapse in memory, but also to see if there's a way that we can begin to show those who might be interested that the city's geothermal system is part of this overarching goal that the city has just recently established regarding climate change and reduction of emissions, that you can say today that this system is reducing greenhouse gas emissions by X number of tons, and again, make that, expand that up for another one of your goals that is consistent with what the city council has embraced in terms of citywide goals for energy, clean energy.
Chair, Commissioner Crawley, very, very good idea. We do have some specific tasks very closely related to that in the growth section. What I understand over here in this comparison of geothermal and carbon offset, maybe so much doesn't fall under this tier of existing customers and our system operation, but I think that would be great outreach, great marketing, a great way to incentivize and to encourage customers to grow and connect onto the system.
Thank you again, John.
And just to build on that, I think that the three identified layers of the pyramid that you have are a great approach. I think they're pretty all encompassing. And then not necessarily another layer, but more of an angle of looking at the pyramid is building pride in the geothermal system. How can we implement these tasks in a way that builds pride among the users in a way that, or builds pride among the users while also meeting the needs that are identified in maintaining the longevity and the use of this asset.
Okay.
Yeah, I would
Any
agree.
other?
Yeah, good comment.
Yes, Commissioner Crowley.
Mr. Chair, I would just say I would agree with that. I think that's it's a good addition.
Awesome, thank you. Any other questions or comments? Hearing none, let's move on to growth.
All right. Okay, so the next tier of this pyramid or this triangle is growth of our system. First and foremost, why do we want to grow the system? Reasons include, well, we talked about kind of the financial status of the geothermal program. So we do want to grow the system to reach financial stability. We do want to grow the system to maximize the use of this resource and get as many buildings off these carbon emitting sources. We also want to, equally related, I guess, we want to grow the system to align with other city energy, climate, carbon goals. Here. We will talk about innovation here in a minute. Innovation can be closely related to growth. I mean, in theory, there could be one, but we have specifically pulled it out and made it a separate topic. So how do we grow? Well, the first way of growing our system is to continue doing what we're doing. And I say that is in being a heating district, being the largest heating district in the country. Let's continue that trend to some degree. By growing it, by growing the heating district side of it, we can look at buildings that are already connected and make sure that they're happy with it, that they're using it responsibly. They're using it for as many beneficial uses as they can, rather than just one or very efficient. Next, which is going to be a big one in the upcoming years, is system infill. Right now, we're serving about half of the buildings that are adjacent to our system. So there's a huge potential to grow our system without the need of any capital investment, without the need of building additional infrastructure, just making connections and finding ways to incentivize them, to encourage them, to find the right mixture, the right recipe to get these other buildings that are already adjacent to our system to connect. And then the last one is also then system expansion. Where is development going? How can we get in front of that? How can we encourage new developments, new developers to tie onto the geothermal system? And there again, we have a handful of tasks identified here. I'm not going to get into any of them right now, but some that land under all these are looking at our incentives, looking at what makes a building want to connect versus not want to connect. It's really starting with some of that outreach and meeting with these buildings and learning from them. Let's see. Commissioner Gravitt, last time we were here, you asked about a geothermal and natural gas comparison. I think specifically you're seeking social and environmental impacts of carbon. This is one that, as I look back after your comment, this was already an identified task on this matrix to further review. There are some published social costs of carbon, and it puts a value of a couple $100,000 to the program. But what we're not quite sure and we're not quite landed on is what this means in terms of carbon taxing and carbon pricing, and really what are all the benefits of geothermal and how does that relate to a dollar figure. This is something that we intend to work closely with our fourth floor, with Steve Hubbell's group, as this question is probably going to play a much larger role in this overall thermal energy plan that's being moved forward. So I just wanted to circle back on that one with you, knowing that we did hear you loud and clear. It is an identified task. We do see the importance of correlating geothermal and carbon. And that's really what I have here on growth. If we could, again, let's pause for discussion, see if there's any other information you'd like to see. Does this feel in the right direction? Most or many of these tasks that we've identified in growth will require some sort of policy setting. So we fully intend to be back in front of you and be discussing many of these tasks and kind of going down all these rabbit holes on later days. Chair.
Awesome. I will kick off the conversation with growth with a question that I think is related to some points that we may have discussed last time. In considering growth, how can we best engage in some of our other necessary partners beyond management of the system? So looking at partners like Ada County Highway District or Idaho Transportation Department for build out of our geothermal system, perhaps into some heated sidewalk areas or roadway areas for snow melt or something like that. I wonder if there are identified tasks or if that's an angle that we had considered with growth.
Sure. Yes, those are identified tasks. The angle we're taking currently is knowing that we need to engage them. We know that we want to be engaged with ACHD, with CCDC when they're doing all the downtown improvements. We want to make sure we're always engaged in staying with other institutions. We work really closely with Boise State on many different projects in research on our geothermal program. We want to make sure we're engaged with different national laboratories, NREL and INL. We want to make sure that as a community, as a geothermal community, we are understanding what other agencies would like to see with this, what we could incorporate with it. Some of this will fall on the innovation side of it, but some of it is the growth side of it as well. So yes, those are identified tasks. The action items of what we're going to do are still yet to be determined.
Awesome. Thank you. And then just a tangential follow-up to, and this may be just speaking from my own ignorance, moving toward building financial stability within the system. I guess, what are the largest barriers to that? And is the establishment of effective partnerships with these other agencies a big step that we could take toward financial stability?
Chair, just recently, we have been partnering with a handful of these agencies, specifically with CCDC and ACHD. And we have been doing some significant, very, very good cost sharing with them. I mean, to the point where on a project we did this summer when we had a lot of Bannock Street ripped up, we're providing materials, they're providing all the labor and installation costs because they're already doing the road work there. This is something that even just yesterday, I was meeting with ACHD to understand where are the next improvements happening downtown. And let's make sure we have that on our radar, and we can either collaborate with them, at a minimum, do work prior to them, so we're not coming in after them. There's many different angles that we're taking in collaboration with these other agencies and institutions. And I'm sorry, what was the second part?
Chair Gravatt, if I could kind of fill in here a little bit too. So yes, those will be looked at. And there was the question about like the snow melt that came up, and not only on maybe the connector, but also sidewalk melt. And you stop and think, well, how much does it snow? And John gave a great example of it. So there's opportunities there. We need to continue to identify them. I wouldn't say those are major barriers. Right? We've got to find. I think those partners are willing to talk if we've got something to talk about, and those are what we're still defining. And that still comes in kind of the growth and innovation part. So we'll continue to kind of pursue those. But BSU would be a great example of somebody who was an excellent partner. We made that main extension out there. That's a campus that continues to grow. So that's a partner we want to continue to really focus on and engage, and like to see them even utilize this resource even more on campus.
Awesome. So then it sounds like the one of the larger barriers to financial stability may just be the user base of the geothermal system.
Sure, Gravatt, that's correct. I mean, just on a very high level, it's almost, if we could double our customers, we'd be there. It's almost that simple. And that's there again, when you start to look at the growth of infill and actually growing the system. And as John mentioned, there's 50% of the buildings that front our infrastructure that aren't connected. This is going to come back to policy discussions with the board or with the commission. It sounds easy, but there's often a large expense that building owner has to do to switch over to geothermal. And those are that's where we're going to have to get creative. I would say that's the biggest barrier. Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. I will turn it over to the commission for any other questions or comments.
Chair Gravatt?
Yes, Commissioner Morgan.
I have a question. Are there any projections to expand beyond downtown and the business market to maybe residential, to beyond that? Is there capacity to do that? I just want to gain a little bit more understanding.
Chair, we do have capacity to grow. We do have significant additional water rights available. We feel like we're going to be able to receive even more after that because of the health and success of the aquifer. Coupled with, we then start looking at building efficiency, and each building can squeeze more heat out of each gallon, means we're going to have more of it to distribute. There are lots of opportunities to grow and expand. That's going to be part of that third tier there of how do we grow the system by the expansion of where do we want to expand. And maybe that can be a follow-up here. That could be a good policy discussion of where do we want to expand. I mean, we could go many blocks through the north end and capture the same square footage that we could go a half block to one of these larger buildings. And so if we're looking at a square footage, that's going to have to be some of our reasoning and some of our policy decisions of where do we want to expand this and why are we choosing this path or this path. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah, I think it does. Thank you. Any other questions or comments? All right, hearing none, let's move to the tippy top of the pyramid, innovation.
Okay, as Jim alluded, this is really the fun one. This is really where the brainstorming can happen and really looking at what do we want this utility to mean for Boise. Innovation can be really, really huge. And like we said, it could be related to growth, but we've intentionally separated here. There's lots of innovative opportunities for this low temperature geothermal water. Some that are very common, some not so common, but we're hearing more and more about it. First off, why do we want to innovate? Innovation will start to diversify this utility. Right now, we're doing one thing with it. And as we start innovating, it'll allow this hot water to be used for different reasons. In addition, with those different reasons, it may encourage more year-round use of it. Most of this water is used in 3 or 4 months out of the year. And then if done correctly, this innovation should also help with financial stability because we're diversifying and we're not putting all of our eggs in that one basket. So some prime examples of what innovation could mean. These are I'm going to say, more common uses of it. Could be making electricity from this water. It could be providing some sort of recreation, a hot springs, a resort type establishment. It could be exploring year-round food production. If you've ever driven through the mountains through Idaho, there are hundreds of greenhouses that dot central Idaho that use geothermal year-round, and they have year-round food production. Possibly making this not just a heating district, but a heating and cooling district could be a very innovative use of infrastructure that's already there. We already have this 2-pipe system. So there are some really good examples of it. And again, Commissioner Chair, last time you asked the question about geothermal for heating intersections or parts of the connector. This is something that other cities do, specifically Klamath Falls, Oregon. It's one of the next largest geothermal cities, much smaller in comparison, but one of the next larger ones. They do heat a handful of their bridges and part of their downtown with geothermal water. And it's ideas like this that should be considered. It's ideas that need to be analyzed by what we're going to be calling this innovation team. And that kind of alludes to the main tasks that are identified here is establishing these innovation teams to further dissect and further understand if this is really a beneficial use of this resource. Is this really what we should be doing with it? And as we establish these innovation teams, perhaps yourself or a commission member would be interested in participating in it. Again, just trying to get all the perspectives and understand what we want to do with this water. So again, tonight we're asking if in general, so I think you've already confirmed that the framework of this pyramid is good, with the addition of adding a pride element to it. But this is the capstone here on the innovation, building on the foundation of making sure our house is in order. This is probably our last opportunity here in the presentation. So if you don't mind, if we could just pause for one last last opportunity to, again, does this, are we going in the right direction? Is there anything else that we should be considering at this time? And again, we're not trying to answer all the questions tonight, and we'll keep this dialogue open, but just in general, kind of first thoughts.
All right, what are your first thoughts, commissioners?
Chair Gravatt.
Commissioner Morgan.
A point of perspective that I think is valuable in this conversation is allowing the
And Commissioner Morgan, you're breaking up a little bit.
And I know that there are, this is a, can you hear me?
Yeah, Commissioner Morgan, if
Can you hear me
you
now?
have the opportunity, because you're breaking up on audio, if you could send in chat or maybe try again in just a minute, we can follow up with you. But I would open it up to other commissioners who have some initial input.
Okay.
All right, other commissioners have any questions or comments related to the tip of the pyramid innovation?
Mr. Chair, this is Larry.
Yes, Commissioner Crowley.
I think John's question was a good one, and given what we've seen this evening, I would say that they're definitely on the right track. I think topically the areas that are most exciting, the diversification, year-round use, financial stability is important, but also the pursuit of innovation is very exciting. I think that offers some real opportunities for the geothermal system. And I'd like to compliment John on the work that they've presented this evening. Look forward to the next phase.
Sure. Thank you, Commissioner Crowley.
Chair Gravatt.
Yes, Councilmember Halliburton.
Thank you. I always want to try to create some space for commissioners to talk first, so I don't jump in and speak over anyone. But I thought I would give staff maybe some advantages, as this probably will make its way to council. One of the things that our Public Works Department does so well, and particularly with geothermal, is collaborate with partnering organizations. And that word's actually come up a couple times from staff members during this presentation, as well as partnership. And I really think that both celebrating the existing great collaborations that already exist, but also through that innovative process, exploring what those new collaborations are, whether those are with different departments at the city or partnering agencies like ACHD or BSU or whatever they may be. I just think that may be worth calling out, whether it's in this innovation slide or in the previous one, there was an innovation box as well. But it seems like that collaboration and innovation goes hand in hand. And it's certainly a legacy I think that we want to see carry forward.
Right. Thank you, Council Member. Any other feedback from the commission?
Chair Gravatt, I have a question. Is there, I mean, I love that there's examples and, like the example of recreation hot springs. Is this, and obviously this is just one example, but would the anticipation be that this would be a city-run facility, or is the opportunity for public-private partnerships so that maybe there are other small local businesses who could participate in some kind of program like this?
Chair, Commissioner, this could be an opportunity for all. I mean, this is the city's geothermal program, but we are we're serving this water to the community of Boise. And specifically, I think of some of these other uses, such as the YMCA or the Elks Hospital, that are heating their swimming pools with it, that are heating their facilities, their water facilities with this water. I don't think it's out of the question to look at a private-public partnership, to look at the private side using some of these, and in the city to further explore these as well. I think it's all on the table for right now.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think this is fantastic. I think, especially if you do some kind of hot spring downtown somewhere that's open to everyone, I think that would be really popular.
Awesome. Thank you. Commissioner Ellis.
Thank you. One more aspect I thought I would add is if you're going to have a team working on this innovation, I want to make sure that you guys have the support and the tools for the nature, that culture of innovating. Does that make sense? So that would be the only, I don't know if I necessarily see that here, but leadership support, the right opportunities and programs and things to help with that innovation is really important.
Thank you.
Am I understanding, Commissioner Ellis, that you're volunteering to be on an innovation team?
Sure.
Awesome. And I would encourage any interested commissioners to reach out as well if you're interested in supporting the innovation teams.
Yes, thank you.
Mr. Chair, this is Larry. I would be interested in participating in the innovation team as well.
Awesome. Thank you, Commissioner.
I would too.
Thank you. All right. And Commissioner Morgan says in the chat, I would be happy to participate in the innovation team.
Sure, it sounds like this whole room, this whole
Yeah.
team.
I think we're pretty excited to be an innovative crew.
Love it. Okay, in the interest of time, we have reached the last slide. Here's our conclusion. So we've presented this draft utility plan structure. All recommendations that we received tonight, we're going to go back to the table, further incorporate these. We're gonna find the best way to continue to share these, whether it be documents offline that we're sharing back and forth, or if we're back in front of you next month. We want to make sure that we stay engaged this entire time. So regardless of updating these vision, mission, values, and kind of this framework, as we're moving forward, we're going to have lots of different policy discussions. We're going to have lots of different, I want to say kind of off the wall utility ideas that just aren't standard to most utilities. Right now, we're thinking of coming back every couple months. And I guess I just want to do a quick check if that seems right, if it feels right. I'm already seeing the nod from both of you. It is every couple months, is quarterly. Is that enough? Is that too much? And then probably most importantly for myself is if there's anything we can do differently to help prepare you for the updates, a different way we can be presenting this. Does this dialogue work best, or whatever thoughts you have about how often you'd like to see us and what we can do to keep you involved?
I would start off the conversation and invite you here whenever it is useful for the build out of this plan and the maintenance of the geothermal asset that we have, so that we can all build pride together in our geothermal system. And I had one other point that now escapes me, but I would also defer to my fellow commissioners for your input on how often you would like to hear from our geothermal team.
Mr. Chair?
Chair, for example, there is a table here of just a few of the many policy decisions that we've already been identifying, from extension policies to incentives to forgiveness policies, a rate strategy. There's a whole list of them already developing.
Thank you. And the point that escaped me came back to me. One piece of information that I would find useful in these discussions is the shape of the conversation that we're having with the end users of the geothermal system, sort of where they're at in considering the future of their use. Commissioners, any other input? Commissioner Ellis.
Thank you. John, when you pointed out the future policy decisions and the bullets, I think there's 10 bullets. I just counted really quickly. Was that a suggestion to kind of help us understand how often we want to hear?
Chair, Commissioner, I just put those on there to emphasize there's a lot that we need to be talking about.
Mhm.
And we do want to get through kind of these first steps, this framework, that set the bearing on this compass. But then even after that, we're going to need to be keeping this dialogue going.
Mhm.
We're going to have specific meetings just on any one of these policies. And so the reason for those are just to provide an example of some of the things that we're going to be here for in the future, up and beyond the stuff we're talking about tonight.
So you've got regular material that you would like to review with us that you'll be more than happy to give us often. So
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know if I have a vote. How often, like what you said, whatever sounds reasonable, but we're eager to hear it. So
Thank you.
thank you.
Any other feedback from the commission? All right, hearing none, I would thank you for your time and for letting us have a robust conversation.
That was excellent. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Commissioners. That was much better than I had envisioned.
Awesome,
That's
thank
great.
you. Is there anything else to come before the commission?
Chair Gravatt, just a couple of things before we close out. I want to be respectful of time. Two items I want to share. First, thanks for being there at the all-electric recycling truck dedication. The commissioners who showed up, we really appreciate that support. That's Republic Services' first all-electric recycling truck anywhere in the nation. They're obviously a big national hauler, so a big deal for us, a big deal for them. And then at this time next year, we're hopeful to have 10 all-electric recycling trucks in the fleet, which will be great. And then also wanted to share with you, you should have received an invite or will be receiving an invite for to listen in on the NWRI panel, the National Water Research Institute panel that we'll be having next week regarding emerging constituents, and also helping us with our recycled water program and how we set up our pilot testing for different technologies that we might want to use for that third facility that we're proposing in the Southeast. So you'll see that it's in the invite. I'll have explanations on how to log in and listen in, but we just want to make sure you all are aware of that. And that is on the 9th, Thursday the 9th, and you'll see the times that certain discussions will be taking place. But we're flying in at least 5 of our 6 panel of experts are going to be here in Boise for the discussion, so we get to pick their brains on the latest and greatest on emerging issues and emerging technologies related to recycled water. And that's all I had.
Awesome, looking forward to it. Any other business from the commissioners? Hearing none, I would just take a moment to recognize the service of 2 commissioners who have stepped down, Commissioner Reading and Commissioner Nink. And we will follow up at a later date with some specific recognitions for their service on the commission. And so with that, that brings us to the end of our agenda. And I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
Chair Gravatt, I move that we adjourn.
We have a motion to adjourn. Is there a second?
I second it.
All right, moved and seconded. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, the motion carries and we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.